that game. That probably is in my top, I don't know, top 5 for game of the year, for my personal game of the year. It's incredible. Dredge, which I think is a spooky game. And then Dave the Diver, which I love. Dave the Diver, also a great game. Is it an indie game, though, is what people are wondering. Because Dave the Diver is developed by Mint Rocket, which is a small team. But Mint Rocket is owned by Nexon, which is a multi-billion-dollar gaming company. So people are wondering,
that sounds like the evil corporation from a Bond movie or something.
Yeah, it sounds like from RoboCop. So yeah, unfortunately, Dave the Diver is getting a lot of heat because of this. And the team at Mitt Romney, that's what I think I'm going to say. It is a small team, but they're getting all this heat because is it really an indie game? I don't know. What do you think? Because they had effectively a blank check to make this.
Well, and that's the thing, is that you can have a small team, but when you're getting backed by a large corporation like that, and you've got the budget for it,
right,
and you don't have the pressures of being that struggling indie developer trying to find an outlet for it and someone to push it and market it, I think you very quickly get outside of that indie game realm.
Yeah. And you know, I still highly recommend you go play Dave the Diver. It's you run a sushi bar, you're exploring, you're a diver. I don't know, it's hard to describe.
That sounds exciting.
It's very exciting. I would make you pull up the trailer, but that was really hard to do for the other game. So, but yeah, Dave the Diver is great, but I don't think it should be in the indie category. That being said, you should still go play it.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably it for this segment.
Yeah, I think we got everything we could out of that. Go play Baldur's Gate 3. When we come back, we're going to get into the bummer part of the show where we talk about industry layoffs. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Entertainment. Today we're talking gaming. We just got done covering the Game Award nominations, and now we're going to talk about industry layoffs.
Of course we're talking gaming, because you're on the show.
That's right. I should wear like a gamer sweater or something.
Be Insights into Gaming when you're on.
Yeah, it would have like Mountain Dew in the intro. All right. So anyway, like I said at the top of the show, despite being lauded as one of the best years in gaming, the industry has been hit by massive layoffs at every level. At the time of writing, it's probably higher now. Around 6,000 people have been laid off in the gaming industry. There's a very helpful but depressing website called videogamelayoffs.com, and it's been tracking the numbers since the beginning of the year. It's just one of those stories you hear about every week if you're not covering, I'm not covering anything, I'm not a journalist, but if you're following gaming news, it's one of those things that you can't really ignore, especially this year. And you know, I don't know anything about economics, but I feel like it's one of those things where when one company does it, there's a real chance of it starting a tidal wave of this, where it's like, it doesn't make it okay, but from the company's point of view, it might have, like, well, if everyone's doing it, we might as well just do it now to cut costs. What do you think?
Well, and I think what you run into really is when one company does it, there's a viable reason for doing it. And usually it's an economic reason, or, you know, it could be depending on what the industry, but we've seen layoffs across the board, regardless of industry, not just video games, and companies that are doing perfectly fine, companies that are doing record numbers, record profits, are laying people off. The unfortunate reality is that record profits, in order to get record profits, you either have to bring in more income, bring in more revenue, increase your your margin on what it's costing you to do things. And to do that, you cut costs, you cut labor.
Yeah.
And that's usually the first thing people cut. And when you've got games that are releasing and you don't have another game in the pipeline that requires that level of labor commitment, that's the first thing that gets cut when it comes to the software industry.
Yeah, and we're going to have a segment coming up where we get into more the nitty gritty on why these layoffs happen. But I just wanted to highlight some of the big examples of these layoffs. One of which is at Unity, the software developers. They let go around 900 people this year alone. Unity has been in some very, very hot water lately. I don't know if you've been following any of this. They changed its pricing structure this year and basically nuked their whole brand for no reason. Not for no reason. They wanted to make more money. But like, it was crazy.
So explain what Unity is and what their product is.
So Unity is an engine, right?
Yeah, it's a game engine.
Yeah, that you can develop your game using Unity.
So a lot of the popular games that are out today are built on this game engine.
Right.
And when a game developer uses this engine, they pay a licensing fee to Unity to use it. So for every copy of the game that's sold, a percentage of that revenue goes to Unity for their royalties for that. And that's what they overhauled.
Right. So this is from The Verge. Unity they said that beginning next year, they would implement a pay per download pricing scheme that would charge developers a flat fee anytime a game using Unity software is installed. I think the keyword there is installed.
Yes.
Right? Because
you can't do demos at that point in time without paying Unity.
Right. And that is including installs that may not be legal
Right.
through pirating and things like that. Also, multiple installations of a game, like if you uninstall it and reinstall it.
Well, because what happens is every time you install a game, the Unity engine reaches out to the licensing server. So if you do demos of the game, if you have pirated downloads of the game, if you uninstall it and reinstall it, every time it goes out and hits that licensing server to confirm that it's a valid license, as opposed to what it was before was on sales. So every time you would sell the game, that would then go towards the licensing.
This is more from The Verge. The fees are further broken down depending on where a game is purchased, meaning that a game bought in the US, UK, and other standard markets is assessed a higher fee than when it's bought in emerging markets like India or China. So, like, I don't know what they were thinking when they did this. This made a ton of people angry. Many developers, publishers, and consumers completely disavowed Unity. People wanted to boycott the game or the engine itself. And you got to understand, Unity is like the number one. It's like Unity and Unreal are like the two engines that pretty much everyone uses for any kind of game development. I mean, Unity has tried to walk some of this stuff back, but I think a lot of the damage might already have been done. What do you think?
Well, and the thing is, the regional pricing that they're talking about is not unusual in any other industry. So in any other industry, talking manufacturing, for instance, you have tariffs on purchased goods. So, for instance, I have a friend of mine who lives down in Peru. For him to buy a graphics card that costs $2,000 up here, he's got to pay $3,000 for it because of the tariffs. So Unity's logic is, well, if there's regional pricing based on tariffs because of purchased goods, then we can do the same thing for licensing. Well, the problem you run into is they're the first ones that are doing this.
Yeah.
Nobody else does this because there's no tariff on licensing. There's a tariff on imports when you're talking about actual manufactured goods. So there's no impetus whatsoever for their reasoning behind what they're doing. That's why they're taking the heat for it. And as a result, they're losing a boatload of business in the process.
And that results in 900 people losing their jobs.
Exactly.
And, should the CEO maybe have taken a pay cut instead of having to fire all these people? Maybe.
That's a very controversial philosophy a lot of rank and file workers have.
Yeah. Another company that I want to highlight is Embracer Group. They've been making all kinds of news in the last couple of years. They've been snatching up a lot of studios like Gearbox, who made Borderlands, and Crystal Dynamics, who you guys will probably know if you've played the new Lara Croft games. Embracer Group is sort of this conglomerate that's just been eating up studios.
Kind of like EA and all the other conglomerates out there.
Yeah. Except they're not doing it very well. They're now cleaning house. This is from IGN's Wesley Yin Poole. Embracer Group has said it has laid off 904 people. That's about 5% of its workforce. It's since its financial struggles beginning following the collapse of the $2 billion deal, reportedly with the Saudi government, funded company Savvy Games Groups. When this deal didn't go through, this was like insane because it like fell apart like the day before it was going to happen, and like the industry was like, what's going to happen now?
Right.
Turns out a bunch of people are going to get laid off. In a recent statement, Embracer said they wanted to become a quote stronger company, I guess. Another studio, they're closing whole studios too that they own now. So Volition, who developed the Saints Row games, they got another stab at Saints Row and it failed critically and commercially. They shut the studio down. So yeah, Embracer is kind of just cutting swaths from their company now. And a lot of it has to do with that $2 billion deal that fell through.
And this is typical, corporate mentality is that they're interested in the bottom line.
Right.
And anytime you have a publicly traded company that has a board of directors and it has, stock owners, your fiduciary duty is to the stockholders. And you trust the people that are making these decisions who aren't always they're business people, but they're not necessarily software or game industry people. And that's sort of where you get that dirty corporate feeling that people tend to get here, is that they're just looking at the bottom line and they're going to cut their losses. They're going to cut what they think are losses in order to make money. And it's not just software. Bob Iger's doing the same thing at Disney and killing Disney. You've got industries across the board that are doing this type of stuff. They see something that's not raking in money. They have a certain margin that they want to meet. And if you're not meeting that margin, then you're a casualty. Ignoring the fact that a lot of times the game industry doesn't work the same way these other manufacturing or entertainment industries work. The return on investment tends to be a much longer timeline that the corporate world and the stock world does not want to wait for.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of giant corporate companies, Amazon Games also had some layoffs. They recently cut 180 jobs from their games department. This comes during the largest sweep of layoffs at Amazon as a whole, where we were talking about, industry-wide stuff, with nearly 27,000 jobs being cut in the last year. Now, we're talking about 6,000 layoffs in the gaming industry alone, 27,000 just from Amazon, just to put things in perspective.
But that's across the board in Amazon. That's
right.
Sales, manufacturing, warehousing, everything. And a lot of that for Amazon is not because they're losing money, because they're not.
No, we actually have record profits.
Right. A lot of that has to do with improvements in how their processes work. A lot of automation going in place. They've roboticized a number of their plants. So they've negated the need to have physical labor here. And you'll notice only 180 of those 27,000 jobs were in the game industry.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people they had in their game studios to begin with, though.
Right. Yeah. So Amazon's revenue is up 13%. Probably helped cutting 27,000 people that you don't have to pay anymore.
Looks good at the bottom line.
Yeah. Net income tripled to $9.9 billion. That's from CNBC's Ashley Kaput. That's a funny name. Sorry, Ashley. But yeah, so profits are up. And like you said, when the bottom line comes up, it's capitalism, baby. That's the way the news goes.
So despite the game industry experiencing one of its best years, over 6,000 people faced layoffs. How do you think these job losses at various levels are impacting the industry's morale and future prospects, especially in light of such a successful game release year?
I follow a lot of people that are in game development on Twitter and stuff, and I listen to a lot of gaming podcasts of people that are very close to people in the industry. It sucks. Turns out layoffs suck. I think it's really, really bad for morale. Because, I think a lot of people they grind and try to get into the industry only for them to have a very high rate of getting laid off anyway. Especially when, like we talked about before, when a game ships, what happens now? And yeah, it's a great year for gaming, but it's tough to ignore all these layoffs. And if you were going into this industry, you're going to have to wonder, am I going to be the next one to get laid off if I even can get a job in the first place?
Yeah, it's when you see this type of thing happen across the board, it's tough when it's your own company and they're doing layoffs. My company did layoffs this year too, and
So did mine.
and it has an effect on morale, and it has an effect on the output. And I think a lot of time the corporate entities that make these decisions never really go out and do a proper impact analysis to see what level of productivity is going to be affected
Yep.
by people with decreased morale, because the idea is, oh, well, if they don't perform, we'll just lay them off. Well, when people walk out the door, it's not a salary and benefits that's walking out the door that you can save money on. There's brain drain. There's tribal knowledge that walks out that door, that as a result, the people that are remaining, because the job still has to get done, and the people that are left to do that job are struggling now to do that job. So either it takes longer, the quality drops off, the volume drops off. And I think when corporate entities make these decisions, they don't always take that impact analysis into account.
Yeah, and speaking of quality, you just triggered something in my mind. This is a very small facet of this whole thing, but one of the sections that gets laid off a lot is quality testers. So that reflects in your game when your game doesn't work because you fired everybody that was going to test it. So I know EA fired a bunch of them lately. I think but again, it's one of those things where when your game's no longer in development, you have no need for these quality testers. But with games like Apex Legends, games that are live as a service that are continuously going in development, where do quality testers fall in that?
Well, and that's the thing. Having worked in the software industry for years, your ratio of testers to developers is usually 2 to 1.
Mhm.
And testing is always seen as the first area that gets cut.
Yep.
But what they don't realize is that you can't trust a developer to test their own code. They're too close to it.
Mhm.
So you take a look at Larian Studios, right? So Larian Studios did their official release in October of Baldur's Gate 3. They've had 10 patches and 10 bug fix patches they put out, emergency bug fixes, and 3 or 4 major patch releases in that time. So the development doesn't stop when it goes out the door because it's never a finished product. You've got a lifetime of probably 4 or 5 years that you still have to support the product. So getting rid of the people once the game's out the door is probably short-sighted.
And within those 4 or 5 years, you're probably going to start development on your next game, especially with something like Baldur's Gate 3 that was insanely successful.
And by the time Baldur's Gate 3 comes out, by the time your premier game comes out, you've already got a pipeline that's full of schedules for what's next in line. And if you don't, then you might as well just shut your doors, because given the time frame it takes, where you're looking at 4 or 5 years of development to put a decent game out. So if you don't already have something in the pipeline and something in the works when your current game comes out, you're going to go out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, you get this a lot with movies too. These things take so long to make, and then it's out, and then people immediately want more.
Right.
And I mean, that's just how it goes. But hopefully that keeps some people employed too. Those are our layoff discussion. In our next segment, we're going to talk more about the causes of it. I know you did a lot of research for this, so I'll probably let you take over for it. But yeah, layoffs are bad. Layoffs are bad, and it sucks.
Layoffs are bad. Don't do layoffs.
Layoffs suck if it happens to you. But we'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Entertainment, everybody. We're wrapping up the show today talking about the cause and the purpose of all these layoffs. So the trend of layoffs in the video game industry can be attributed to several factors, and understanding this is key to forecasting the trends during and its impact on the industry's future. And we go to our corporate shill, Joseph Whalen, for the layoff report.
Wow.
Why layoffs are a good thing. Go.
No, not why they're a good thing. What causes layoffs? So we already kind of touched on economic fluctuations. So the video game industry is not immune to the broader economic trends in the world. And economic downturns or market uncertainty can lead to budget cuts and staff reductions. And everyone knows where we are with inflation and how tight money is, and everything's costing more money. So that's pretty obvious right there. We're also looking right now, and it's first time in the industry's history that we're in a post-pandemic period. So we're still looking at adjustments from that. COVID-19 pandemic led to a surge in gaming as people sought entertainment during the lockdowns. This surge may have led to overhiring or overexpansion in some companies. As the world returns to normalcy, demand may stabilize or decrease, leading to restructuring.
There's also, people now are like, there's the discussion of work from home. Well, why wouldn't I just always work from home if I can? Especially when it comes to game development. A lot of these folks packed up their work computers and brought them home to keep working on games during the pandemic as best they could. So now, there's a discussion of, do we even need to be going back into, in the work? And that's across all industries. If we can, can we just keep the work at home thing going? And then, that's more cost cutting because then you don't have to rent office space.
Absolutely. And a lot of companies are looking at that as a possibility. In fact, behind you is a permanent workstation that's been set up for my wife, Michelle, now, who works from home 2 days a week as a result of that.
Yep.
And they've saw what they can get out of it. So the other thing you look at is shifts in consumer behavior. Changes in gaming trends and consumer preferences can impact revenue streams. Companies may need to restructure to align with these shifts, leading to layoffs in departments that no longer align with new strategies. We also have technological changes. Advancement in technology can render certain skills or positions obsolete. As companies invest in automation and new tech, there may be a reduced need for certain roles. And then we get to the corporate shill side of things with financial management and strategic shifts.
Ugh.
So poor financial management or strategic pivots can necessitate cost-cutting measures, including layoffs, which is exactly what Unity ran into.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to make a buck, so they made a change in their strategic, product line there, and it came back to bite them.
It's a very nice way of saying we want to make as much money as possible all the time.
Absolutely. So tell us about what the actual impact of all this is on the video game industry.
Yeah, so there's innovation and competition. Layoffs can lead to a consolidation of talent, with larger companies absorbing experienced personnel. You got a little bit of that with Embracer. Now that they're all part of this conglomerate, maybe they're having some cross-studio development. This could foster innovation, but might also reduce competition if smaller companies struggle to compete, which is definitely true, especially when it comes to indie development, which is what we have next. As talented individuals leave larger companies, there might be, a surge in indie game development, which I think we talked about this before when we were talking about the Microsoft Blizzard thing, where
Yes.
it's like as more studios are bought up and part of large corporate structures,
Something has to fill that vacuum, and the indie companies step in to do that.
Exactly. There's, this can lead to more diverse and innovative gaming landscape, which I'm all for. Assuming, it's, I'm all for the creative side of things, as you can probably tell by this. It's tough to see, but maybe that is a silver lining.
Well, and the one advantage you get from the indie side of things is you don't get the corporate shield. You get idealism. You get companies that come in here with this idealistic view of, I'm going to make this for the fans. I'm going to listen to the fans, and I'm going to produce something for the fans. If it doesn't sell, then the corporate guys come in, they suck up the company, and then they move on. A lot of times, for the longest time, BioWare was of that philosophy of, you had a couple of regular guys there that wanted to make good games for people, and they did, until they sold their souls to EA and moved on.
We would all do it. Let's be honest.
I would too. Hell, if I could get, a couple $1 million for this podcast, I'd sell it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, next episode, we're going to have McDonald's branding all around the place. Yeah, I highly recommend you play Sea of Stars because it is a very similar situation. I'm blanking on the name of the developers, but it's like that where they made another game called The Messenger, but they all seem like very down to earth people. We have shifts in job roles. The industry may witness a shift in the types of roles that are in demand with more emphasis on technologies like AI, VR, and cloud gaming. I don't know about VR. Are we done with VR?
I think VR is pretty much, although Apple wants to bring VR back, I think they're missing the boat.
They're going
on
to make
that.
people spend like $10,000 for a headset.
So you can get freaky eyes on the outside of your headset.
Yeah. We talked about this already a little bit, but the impact on gaming quality and diversity. Layoffs can lead to reduced manpower, impacting quality. However, they can also force companies to focus on core competencies and produce higher quality titles, which is kind of what Sony's doing. They're spending and taking the time to have all these first party games that are, industry wide successes, commercially and critically, that sort of hold up the brand just by virtue of existing. And finally, employee well-being and industry reputation, which the gaming industry already has a pretty bad reputation in terms of like crunch culture, which is probably still happening. But I think it has been reduced because it was exposed a lot with how often a lot of these devs are crunching. And you hear stories from like 2005 of people pulling like 30-hour days. And it's like, oh my God, how do we let that happen? But hopefully that's a little bit better now.
And I've been on build teams, not for the gaming industry, but in the software industry, where we've put in 36, 48 hours straight to get a build out the door for, an artificial deadline that was set by a product manager because he made a promise to a customer. So it happens across the board.
Yeah. This might affect the ability to attract top talent in the future, which is true. If your industry has a terrible reputation and fires people all the time, people probably don't want to work for you.
Amen to that.
So yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums everything up. That covers the layoffs. Of course, we started off pretty positively with the Game Awards.
So considering the influence of economic fluctuations on the video game industry, how do you think companies can better prepare for market uncertainties to avoid drastic measures like layoffs, especially given the industry's recent success?
I don't know. Maybe pay higher ups less, which is never going to happen, but it's a suggestion. I know everybody turns to what was his name? He was a Nintendo CEO, Iwata, I forget his name. But Nintendo, when the Wii U came out and like completely failed, he ended up taking a pay cut so they didn't have to lay people off. Now everybody looks to that like it was a miracle because it kind of was.
Right.
And people don't, CEOs are never going to do that. But that would be nice if that was the alternative to laying people off. But, it's not the way that capitalism goes, unfortunately.
See, and I think it has to be research and development. I think if you got enough irons in the fire, if you throw enough stuff against the wall, something's going to stick. And if you've got a couple of games that are in there, you can tell after 2 or 3 years of development if your game's going to be a success, because at that point in time, you've trotted out previews at a couple of game shows. You've had some industry experts take a look at it. You've got some play time with it, and people need to be more antiseptic, I'll say, in their judgment of their products. If you get to that point and the product isn't very good, you need to cut your ties to it and move on.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because you should look into the development cycle of Redfall. We covered that last time I hosted for a gaming show, but since that game's come out and like is awful, devs have come out and said that like they knew this game was going to fail, but they had to release it anyway because you had to put something out, and it was like sunk cost fallacy where we spent all this time. We probably should cancel this game and rework it, but higher ups need us to release something, so here's what you get.
Well, and going back to one of my old favorites, Star Wars: The Old Republic, same thing. They spent almost 10 years of development on that, 6 of which was trying to build their own game engine before they realized they couldn't, and they wound up using a 10-year-old game engine to basically reskin the entire game for it. And then they released it, and within the first 6 months, they lost 50% of their subscribers because the game just wasn't up to what it was supposed to be. At some point in time, you need to have the sense to pull the plug on it.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, and you have other projects that are in the works that are under development, you shift your resources to something that's more promising.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll, with all these layoffs, and maybe somebody will learn something from it, hopefully.
Yep.
But yeah, so any final thoughts? I feel like we've covered a lot of this. We've shared our opinions.
We've beaten the horse quite well here.
Well, I guess that's going to wrap things up for today. Thank you so much for listening. Before we head out, we've got some more show plugs for you. If you haven't
But the
already,
first set wasn't enough.
I know the plug's so nice we do them twice. If you haven't already subscribed, what are you doing? Pause this, go subscribe, come back, rewind it, play from the beginning. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, maybe Stitcher if it's still around, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Amazon, and of course, Pandora. If you have any comments or questions about today's show, email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter. Some people call it X, insights_things. Twitch. If you have Amazon Prime, that means you've got Twitch Prime, and we'd love to have that Prime sub over at twitch.tv/insightsintothings, where some of you may be watching us live stream right now. Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Instagram at insightsintothings. And all of these links and so much more can be found on insightsintothings.com. That's going to wrap things up for today.
That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 22, No More Yesterdays. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my informed and concerned co-host, Michelle Whalen.
Hi, everyone.
How you doing today, sweetheart?
Doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Anything exciting going on other than flip-flop of hosts on the shows recently?
No, I think we're all trying to get into the swing of things, I guess.
Indeed, we have kicked off our holiday with Thanksgiving and mad rush up until the end of December now.
Yeah. Now it's all downhill.
Yeah, pretty much. So, in this episode of Insights into Tomorrow, we delve into the alarming parallels and stark differences between the nationalism and anti-Semitism of the Nazi era and today's world. We explore how both periods are marked by ideologies of exclusion and economic turmoil, fueling nationalist sentiments, alongside the dangerous tendency of scapegoating minorities. The Nazi regime's systematic state-sponsored anti-Semitism and its sophisticated propaganda machine present a stark contrast to today's more decentralized, internet-driven spread of anti-Semitic ideology. And I thought this was kind of poignant because we have had for several years now in the United States, one entire political movement that focuses on the past. You know, this whole idea of make America great again, but they never tell you when they're referring to.
Right.
And the time that they're referring to goes back to some of these darker days during a time period of exclusion, of civil rights not being a priority, of individual rights not being a priority. And The people that want to go back to that time are the ones who were in power and advantaged at that time. And that was a very small number of people at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you have a large segment of the population pushing for that now and completely ignoring the parallels that they're shooting for now compared to what happened in the 1930s and 40s with the rise of other nationalist movements, socialism and fascism, is disturbing. And that's why I titled this podcast No More Yesterdays. You know, we don't want to go back. We've, over the last 100 years, we as a country, we as a civilization, and the human race in general have evolved considerably in that time. And there's a segment of the population who desperately wants to drag us back to those dark times. So we're going to take a look at some of the comparisons on that and offer some insights and side-by-side looks at what it was like then, what it is today, and hopefully have enough wisdom to not go down that dark path again. But before we do that, though, I want to take a moment to remind our listening and viewing audience to, if you don't already do so, subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can also find audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days. I would also invite you to write in, give us your feedback, disagree with us, tell me your point of view. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on X at insights_things, or you can find links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get going?
Oh, let's the fun begin.
Here we go. The comparison of nationalism and anti-Semitism during the rise of the Nazi Party in the first half of the 20th century with today's political climate reveals some notable similarities as well as significant differences. From a similarity standpoint, you have an ideology of exclusion. Both eras witness ideologies that define the nation in exclusionary terms, which is really contrary to what this country was ever built on. The Nazi Party's version of nationalism was grounded in racial purity and the exclusion of Jews, among others. Despite the fact that there's Jewish ancestry on Hitler's side, and Hitler wasn't even German to begin with. So, purity. Modern nationalism, while not typically as extreme, often similarly hinges on defining insiders and outsiders, sometimes marginalizing certain groups. There's also significant similarities in economic factors. Economic uncertainty played a significant role in the rise of the Nazi Party as it capitalized on the economic woes of post-World War I Germany to gain support. Today, the economic uncertainty, particularly in the wake of globalization and economic crises, also fuels nationalist sentiments.
So now we'll talk about scapegoating. So the Nazi regime notoriously used Jews as a scapegoat for Germany's problems. In contemporary politics, while not as extreme or widespread, there is still a tendency in some nationalist narratives to scapegoat immigrants or ethnic minorities for social and economic issues. The use of propaganda. The Nazis were adept at using propaganda to spread their ideologies. And today, while the methods have evolved, the use of media and particularly social media to dismantle nationalist and anti-Semitic sentiments echoes this aspect of the past. The rise of the term fake news to discredit credible sources that point out the lies and crimes of one political organization over another has threatened to undermine any source of truth.
So while there's a number of similarities, there's also differences. So the first one we look at is the institutional framework. The current global institutional framework, including organizations like the United Nations and various human rights conventions, acts as a significant barrier against the rise of extremist ideologies akin to those of the Nazi era. Even though the United Nations has proven time and again to be ineffective against even mildly concerted efforts by a few obstructionist members to undermine the basic principles of its existence. The other is public awareness and education. Again, you would think by now we would have a better understanding of these things having lived through it once. There is a higher level of public awareness and education about the dangers of extreme nationalism and anti-Semitism today, largely as a result of the lessons learned from World War II and the Holocaust. However, with active efforts to distort history, ban books and curricula teaching about the atrocities and culture of denial has arisen that threatens the basic defense against a repeat of the atrocities of the Nazis.
Then there's the extent and nature of anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism of the Nazi era was state-sponsored, systematic, and led to the Holocaust. Modern anti-Semitism, while a serious concern, typically does not manifest with the same intensity or state-level endorsement. This less intensive approach in and of itself may actually be more dangerous, and it makes the concept of anti-Semitism more appealing to the less radicalized members of society and thus threatens to make the practice even more widespread. Globalization and digital connectivity. So now we have the contemporary world, which, is more interconnected now than it was in the 1930s and the 1940s. This globalization and digital connectivity can both fuel nationalist sentiments, but also provide means for counter-narratives and global solidarity against extremism. So recent history has shown how easily social media can be manipulated to propagate hate and violence more so than prevent it throughout.
So just on what we talked about here, do you think the technological advantages of communication today makes it more or less likelihood for something like this nationalist movement to propagate or be defended against?
Honestly, I would have to say kind of a little bit of both. It's definitely easier for the word to get out, for this propaganda to be spread. You have so many people that as soon as they see a post about something, a tweet about something, a picture about something, they forward it to everybody that they know without even checking to see if it's factual. But then on the other hand, you have real-time news, real-time events that are happening that people are being informed about pretty much right as it happens, as opposed to back in the day where it could be weeks before somebody heard about something, months before somebody heard something, hours before. Now it's almost instantaneous that the other side of things is getting out there. So I think it's a little bit of both with it.
What about the level of anonymity that you could have starting a movement on the internet now where you're insulated? You don't have to put yourself out there. When you had the Nazis were starting their movements, they were going out, putting themselves in public beer halls and riling up the people directly, and exposing themselves at that point in time to prosecution and persecution and stuff like that. Do you think it's more likely that you'll get, we'll call them rabble rousers, when they can hide behind the anonymity of a Twitter or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. Because now, and you see that just in general with the trolls that are out there, that, somebody posts a picture of Dolly Parton from this past few days ago. She performed a halftime show, and all these trolls came out, or she wasn't really singing, she was lip syncing, and and just and is it something where they would have actually ever said that to her face? Probably not. They wouldn't never have done that. But now, because you can hide behind it and you don't have that fear of persecution, and especially now, there are so many things out there where before, if you commented or posted something, it would have your name. And granted, most people would change their usernames and things like that. Now there's so many areas to post or comment where you can do it anonymously now. They've added that feature. So now it gives you, now I can be more of a rebel rouser, and go out there and say what I have to say, and nobody will ever find out that it's me.
That's a very good point. So how do you think the rise of social media and the concept of fake news has affected the way Americans understand and discuss political issues, including topics like nationalism and anti-Semitism? Can people have a logical, civilized discussion, or we're seeing extremism on both sides, and just because one side says one thing, you could have one side that finds the cure for cancer, finds a magical pill that solves world hunger and creates world peace all at one time, and the other side would oppose it because the opposition came up with it.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's tough, because especially now with what is going on in current events as of today, with the events of 10/7 that are still fresh. You have hostages that are, just starting to be released almost, 50 days later. And there are people obviously on both sides, and it's very hard to have that sit down with somebody that's so passionate. You almost need to find somebody who's, I don't want to say sensible, but because everybody is passionate about their stance, no matter which stance they take. But sometimes when you're so passionate about something, you can't even allow the other side to even educate you on how they feel. Why do you feel the way you feel? What has been done to you? But you need to hear me as well. And that's, I think, the problem, that when you get into these situations, the person that's, from both sides, they're just so passionate, they don't even have that moment to just let me sit back take it in.
There's an overall lack of objectivity when the passions run that high.
Right.
And when you lack the ability to be objective, you also can't make a logical, objective argument for your point of view either.
Right.
And I think that's the problem. Like, if somebody questions, if you feel passionate about something, that's wonderful. And if somebody questions you about that, you should be passionate enough, but knowledgeable enough to defend your point of view.
Right.
And when you resort to insults, which is usually the first direction that it goes.
Right.
It's first they start to insult you, and then they attack your position without providing any support for their own position. When you go to those tactics, you kind of lose all your credibility at that point in time.
Right.
And that's, I think, what we tend to run into. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper into some of the anti-Semitism of the Nazi era. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
And we're back. So the comparison of anti-Semitism in the Nazi era and its manifestation in the contemporary world underscores both a continuity in prejudice and a significant shift in how it is expressed and dismantled. So anti-Semitism in the Nazi era. You had state-sponsored policies, and the most striking aspect of Nazi-era anti-Semitism was its systematic state sponsorship. The Nazi regime under Hitler embedded anti-Semitic ideology into government policy, which led to the progressive isolation, dehumanization, and eventual mass extermination of Jews in the Holocaust. This involved legislation like the Nuremberg Laws and the organization of state-sponsored pogroms such as Kristallnacht, which actually had their 85th, I believe. No, I'm trying to remember how many. I think it was 85 years. Recently, it was the anniversary of Kristallnacht, actually, not that long ago. So then we also have the propaganda machine. The Nazis effectively used state-controlled media, including newspapers, films, and radio broadcasts to spread this anti-Semitic propaganda. This propaganda was sophisticated and persuasive, shaping public opinion by depicting Jews as the source of Germany's economic problems and social decay. This constant bombardment of anti-Semitic messaging was a key tool in desensitizing the German public to the escalating persecution of the Jewish people.
And I think that's really the key there is the desensitization, because I think you're running into that now, contemporary-wise. So anti-Semitism in the contemporary world is a little bit different, but certainly still present. There's a resurgence in incidents. In recent times, there's been a noted increase in anti-Semitic incidents globally. These incidents range from vandalism and hate speech to violent attacks. Unlike the Nazi era, contemporary anti-Semitism is not typically part of an overt government policy, but rather manifests at the level of individual actions and groups, some of which can be classified as extremist or terrorist in nature. You also have the role of digital platforms today, which we already talked about briefly. The proliferation of the internet and social media has radically changed the landscape of how anti-Semitic ideologies are spread. These platforms often serve as echo chambers, where harmful stereotypes and conspiracy theories about Jewish people can be circulated rapidly and without traditional filters or controls. Unlike the centralized state-controlled propaganda of the Nazi era, modern anti-Semitic rhetoric is more decentralized, but can be just as pervasive and insidious in its reach.
So some key considerations. So you have the scale and intensity. While contemporary anti Semitism is a serious concern, its scale and intensity differ from state orchestrated genocidal campaigns of the Nazis. The Holocaust remains a uniquely horrific manifestation of anti Semitism. The global response. So, today's world, informed by the lessons of the Holocaust, tends to have stronger institutional and societal responses against anti-Semitism. Numerous countries have laws criminalizing hate speech and Holocaust denial, and there are global efforts to combat and educate against anti-Semitism. Granted, there is also a push in some countries, including the United States, to manipulate the education system for political purpose, something anti-Semitism instruction could easily fall victim to. Then we also have the challenges of the digital age. The decentralized nature of the internet poses unique challenges in monitoring and countering anti-Semitic content. Online hate speech can be more elusive and requires nuanced approach to balance freedom of speech with the need to prevent hate speech and violence.
Well, the form and expression of anti-Semitism have evolved from the state-driven, systematic approach of the Nazi era to the more fragmented and decentralized incidents of today. The underlying prejudices and stereotypes remain a concerning continuity. The modern challenge lies in adapting the changing landscape of communication and globalization in which these harmful ideologies persist and spread. So, clearly there are differences between today's anti-Semitism and the Nazi era. One of the concerns that I have is what you're seeing today is more toned down in that it's not the same level of state-sponsored hatred that you were getting during the Nazis, which makes it more appealing to a larger group of people who would have been less inclined to support some of the policies of the Nazis, but it still strikes a note with the prejudices that they have, where they might not want to take Jews and put them in concentration camps, but we're not going to let Jews have jobs in this sector, or we're not going to let them live in this neighborhood, or we're going to, do the various violent things that we see now. And it makes it almost more palatable to a larger group of people because you're not catering to that extremist group. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, unfortunately, again, right now with what's going on, there is the violence going on. There are people that are out there that it's not the Holocaust. It's not let's put you in a concentration camp. It's let's just kill the Jews. Like, that's what is so scary, is there are people who in almost every country right now, people that are being attacked only because they are Jewish. You have a woman in France who a group of people broke into her house and beat her up and almost left her for dead only because she was Jewish. So unfortunately, from what I'm seeing, it's almost worse in a way.
That's my point. That's exactly my point, is because it's not
it's not let's gather you up and put you someplace. It's we're just going to take care of you right now.
Right, but it's done almost on an individual basis.
Yes, there's nobody saying we're the Nazis.
Right. You don't need to have that overt,
I can just
obvious presence.
Right. I just hate Jews, so I'm going and attacking you.
Right. And that's my point, is that because it's being done
yes, okay,
less from a government policy standpoint and more from a grassroots standpoint,
right,
it brings more of those hatred-filled people into the mix,
right,
to take action that they wouldn't normally have taken.
Right. There are people who who would normally use Uber for rides or to get food, who have gone in and changed their profile